joining forces in more ways than one. We are in fact bringing together all the 5 actors of the MIT's innovation ecosystem stakeholder model. That is academia, it is governments, large corporations, entrepreneurs, and risk capital. If we have these 5 actors working together economically and socially and environmentally, innovation will appear together with value creation. But let's get to our session's topic, innovation towns and regional economic growth. If we are to reach the SDGs in time, we'll have to grow regional ecosystems for innovation. As mentioned by yesterday's keynote speaker, Edlam Abera Yemuru, the cities and innovative towns must play different and complementary roles. The academics and university will probably still stay in the larger cities, but the industry companies will need area and natural resources out in the regions. So how can the stakeholders in the cities and regions connect to make a global impact? My name is Gabriel Quickstad, and I'm a member of the Collingwood World Summit Steering Committee and the managing director of the innovation company called Kunskapskompaniet. I feel honored to welcome you to today's session, and we'll start off with a man with such an impressive track record. That is Mayor Jeff Lehman of the city of Barrie in Canada. Jeff Lehman is the 46th mayor of the city of Barrie. Mayor Lehman is the current chair of Ontario's Big City Mayors Caucus, representing Ontario's 29 largest cities. Mayor Lehman is also a founding director of Alketra, the second largest community-owned utility in North America, serving more than 1 million customers in Southern Ontario. He holds a BA from Queen's University and a master's degree with first-class honours from the UK's London School of Economics. Mayor Lehman is a passionate believer in transforming urban economies through public and private entrepreneurship. So please, Mayor Lehman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. It's too early in the morning for so many nice words. Thank you for the introduction. I'm going to spend 6 minutes, because that's half of 5 to 7 minutes, telling you about 3 municipal collaborations that I believe are helping us drive innovation in our community. The city of Barrie, for those who don't know it, is 150,000 people. We're about an hour north of the city of Toronto. We like to think of ourselves as a bit of the capital of central Ontario. We're halfway between Ontario's recreational playground in Collingwood, Georgian Bay, and Muskoka, and the urban area of Greater Toronto. And that allows us as a city, as a municipality, to work with cities large and small, and I think on the regional innovation level, to bridge some of smaller town Ontario and urban Ontario. So the 3 collaborations, one was mentioned in that brief bio, and that's Electra. Electra is a local distribution company, an electricity company. We serve 1 million customers. We have about a $3 billion balance sheet, and we're owned by 7 cities together. We collectively, 7 municipalities, through a series of mergers, put together this company, which we jointly own. It is the city of Barrie, Markham, Vaughan, Mississauga, Hamilton, St. Catharines, and Guelph. And the reason this is significant, and I bring it up here, is because by the municipalities collaborating, the towns getting together to found this company and grow it, what we've been able to do is develop a substantial R&D arm centered on what we call the GREAT Center, which is the Green Energy Research Center in Guelph, Ontario. And that is a living lab where we are helping to commercialize new products, particularly in distributed energy and renewables. The message here really is that by the 7 cities, initially there were 3, then 5, then 6, then 7 cities, we've been able to put together a company that is capable of being part of the innovation economy and itself as a bit of a social enterprise, working to bring new technologies to market. But I'll give you a very concrete example of how that helps as well. As some of you may know, in July, my city was hit by a tornado. There was a significant amount of damage to a South End neighborhood. And the company, because of its scale, was able to restore power and use customer technology at a very high level to assist people. And with climate change bringing more severe weather, we anticipate the need for those types of services to be even greater. But the key message I wanted to give you around Electra is that towns working together, and in our case, cities, are able to, because of our joint interest in both serving our communities and advancing goals like SDG, and particularly clean energy, through this utility, we are playing an active role in bringing new technologies to market and ultimately bringing those technologies to our communities. The second collaboration I wanted to mention to you is with our college, Georgian College, which has a presence in Collingwood and 6 other centers, and its main campus is in the city of Barrie. The city, our municipality, has funded 3 buildings over the course of the last 15 years to build Georgian College's applied research capabilities. And as many of you will know, community colleges in this country are increasingly collaborating with universities to blend and blur the types of education that used to be in 2 entirely distinct worlds. That education, for example, engineering and electrical trades, is in very high demand. And when we speak about growing regional production, you can't talk about that without talking about labor capacity shortages at the moment of skilled trades and of certain skill sets, and ensuring that you've got a workforce that's capable of supporting the kinds of companies and labor demands that we're seeing now in manufacturing. We've had a bit of a renaissance in manufacturing in the city of Barrie. We've seen almost 2,000 new jobs added over the course of the last decade, and that reversed a long decline in manufacturing employment. Some of that's just growth. We're one of the fastest growing cities in the country, but some of it is a return to what I would call competing on quality. We're not a low-cost production jurisdiction when we look at the world. We very much have to compete on the strength of innovation, and the companies that have continued to produce in Canada usually do so because they have a unique business model, and that needs to be supported by very skilled labor by its very definition. So our collaboration with Georgian College has been hugely important. The third and last piece I want to mention is something called the Barrie Health Accord. In the interests, I've been mayor for 10 years, and I've been frustrated over the years in the amount of time that we as towns and cities spend reacting to problems rather than treating their root causes, and nowhere more so than in healthcare and human services. So in an effort to try and collaborate with the healthcare sector more broadly, I brought together 5 organizations, and those are the County of Simcoe, which is our regional government, my hospital, Royal Victoria Hospital, the Barrie Police Service, and our public health unit. And the 5 of us, the City of Barrie being the 5th, signed an accord agreeing to collaborate on capital planning to shift investment upstream into prevention, health promotion, and the root causes of some of the social issues challenging our communities. By investing in the social determinants of health, I mean, if you only care about the business case and the money, it reduces the pressure on emergency services, whether you're a hospital emergency room or a municipality that runs a fire, police, and ambulance service. But much more importantly, the outcomes for people are so greatly improved if we can catch them before they fall, when we're talking about situations like mental health or addictions or homelessness. But more broadly, we can build healthy communities. And all of these things, of course, go together, and it goes together so beautifully underneath the goals of the SDG and this summit, in fact, where building a healthier community also leads to different transportation opportunities, stronger economies, and ultimately us facing the challenges of climate change and the challenges that affect us as a globe. So if there's the one message I want to leave with you, it's that these 3 collaborations, which are all sort of at different stages, we do try and measure. And I know the first 2 parts of the resolution are around data. We've worked hard to try and build reliable metrics to see whether what we're doing is working. And I can tell you that in the last few years, even with COVID, and now we're all focused on epidemiological metrics, we have really tried to build out that ability to report to our community on the success. But the success of any one public sector body will be so greatly limited if we don't build a collaboration to address some of these broader issues. And through those three examples, I think we're starting to get there with our work in the city of Barrie. So I'll leave it there, Gabriel. Thank you very much again, everybody, for being here and giving me the chance to speak today.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Now we will go further to Amanda McDougall. She's the mayor of Cape Breton in Canada. Amanda McDougall was first elected to the Cape Breton Regional Council in 2016, serving as councillor for District 8 and most recently elected to serve as mayor in 2020. As councillor for District 8, Amanda has proven to be a strong and a community-minded leader. With a moral compass to make the right decisions and ask tough questions, Amanda has the character and courage needed to lead towards a prosperous and sustainable future. Amanda has helped move our communities forward and is still aware of the incredible potential that the community holds. So please, Amanda, you could keep on.
Gabriel, I am so sorry to say this, but I just received an email message from Amanda McDougall, and she's actually traveling and unable to attend this session. My apologies.
Okay. No worries at all. Then we had a wonderful presentation, I hope, but we will continue with Kari Nessa Nordtun from the mayor of Stavanger in Norway. Kari Nessa Nordtun was elected mayor of Stavanger in 2019. She represents the Labour Party and is now serving her first four-year term as Stavanger's 53rd mayor. As head of Norway's energy capital, she is dedicated to the further development of the oil, gas, and growing renewable sector, and is a strong voice for new technology, climate issues, and green urban development. Nordtun has a law degree from the University of Bergen, and during her time in university, she worked with pro bono legal advice. So please, Nordtun.
Hello, I'm going to share the video of the mayor soon. One moment, please.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at the second Collingwood World Summit. My name is Kari Nessa Nordtun and I am mayor of Stavanger in Norway. Stavanger is situated in the southwest of Norway, close to the North Sea. We have about 144,000 citizens. The city region consists of 370,000 people and is one of the most fastest growing regions in the country. Our location close to the North Sea has a major impact on the development of local crafts and industry. We are known as the energy capital of Norway. Our region is proud home to more than 1,000 companies within oil and gas. The region houses all major international operators that are present in Norway. Due to this, we have a highly international population that counts almost every nationality in the world. The growth is in the oil industry in the early 1970s led to a rise in the employment and an urgent need for housing developments. Combined with the impact of the deregulation of the housing market, this led to an extensive urban sprawl in the region, a pattern which is characteristic for the current situation in the Stavanger region. Stavanger has ambitious goals for sustainable urban development. As part of this commitment, we worked to facilitate a more centralized and urbanized development, close to public transport and facilities like kindergarten, schools, and shops. Together with our surrounding municipalities, we are making great investments in building infrastructure that support this goal. We work to secure mixed housing areas to fit the needs of all parts of the population. But in order to secure economic growth, we need to attract more families with children to come and live and work in our city. There is a lot of exciting things happening in Stavanger. We know that great possibilities for business development and work will continue to rise. Therefore, we must secure that the people who come to Stavanger for the job will stay for the lifestyle. And of course, as Mayor of Stavanger, I find that it to be just the perfect task. Thank you so much for your attention. Okay.
Mr. Gabriel, you're mute. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry about that. Then we had the video message from Karinessa Nordtun. I could answer a few of the questions since we're from the same country and she is not here with us digitally. We'll continue with Laura Wiper, a professor of Algoma University in Canada. Dr. Wiper has a PhD in adult education and community development, with specialization in comparative, international, and development education from Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. Dr. Wiper has worked in community development for more than 20 years and is currently chair of the Department of Community, Economic, and Social Development at Algoma University. She is a long-time food activist, a board member for Slow Food in Canada, and sits on Slow Food International's Activist Educators Working Group. So please, Dr. Wiper.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today. I'm wondering if it's okay to share my screen.
Absolutely.
Okay, just give me 1 minute then. All right, can you see that?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, so I am going to look at the economics and of the SDG goals, but I'm going to actually start by looking at this idea of how regional and global connectivity of activist movements can further advance the realization of these goals. I would like to start with a land acknowledgement, though, because I am an uninvited guest on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe Nation and the traditional lands of the Métis Nation. But further to that, I also am on the sacred lands that were set aside for education envisioned by Chief Shinwa for our children and those yet unborn, because I'm sitting in the building you see here in the picture, which is the main old building of Algoma University, which was a previous residential school. So a lot of my work starts in terms of my positionality, my identities, and in terms of that ability to acknowledge the lands, our part in that history that we share, because I really think that we have to think about reconciliation as part of this idea of resilience and sustainability as attached to those SDG goals. In terms of the space that we take here in Canada, for those of us that are settlers, this is a shared space of Indigenous land. And when we look at this idea of resilience related to the SDG goals, really it's been conceptualized across many different sectors for a very long time. And even recently by Townsend and Agnachi, in terms of NATO's report that they need a fourth core task to protect allied populations from non-traditional threats like COVID and climate change. So that brings us back to the SDG goals specifically. But resilience has often been framed as persistence, adaptation, transformation, that ability to bounce back to some sort of normality. But I would suggest we need to focus not just on the individual, but multiple levels, because many of these definitions are very traditional in terms of being based in dominant discourse and deficit ideology. So we really need to move to paradigms of resilience and sustainability that are equitable. And if we look at it in relation to the present time and COVID-19 as a cultural trauma, where we've all been profoundly affected and our identities have been affected in irrevocable ways, as we've now become more intertwined with the systems that we have always come to be a part of, but public health policy and these types of things are affecting us in ways that are very different from the past. So we need to really look at how are we going to build resilience and as related to the SDGs in these current times. And so one of the potential points is this idea of equitable resilience. So this a form of human and environmental resilience that really takes account of those issues of vulnerability, the differences in power and equity, so that we can all look at these human environmental systems in terms of avoiding imbalances of power as we move into the future. And this is really tied to ideas of just sustainability and just resilience, in that it cannot be just about environment. We have to take into consideration people, cultures, community contexts. And the same goes with just the idea of just resilience by Dawoodi. And this is very intricately tied to the SDGs, of course. And the question being, how do we shift that paradigm? How do we increase political and civic engagement so that our politicians understand the importance, the public understands, so that we can both be supported and assured in this. So the three examples I'm going to quickly talk about are Slow Food International, Lake Superior Living's Labs, and Rural Agri-Innovation Network. So when we look at activist movements, good, clean, and fair is really what Slow Food is about. And it's really local communities addressing local needs, finding locally defined solutions, but networked across the globe. So this is where we look at that idea of local and regional and how it moves to global connectivity, because we're sharing our challenges and we're sharing our solutions. The second example is Lake Superior Living Labs Network, which is a group of activist educators that work around Lake Superior, both community-based organizations and university-based researchers. And there's a lot of different projects that are going on related to this. Community-based research in all of these areas, climate action work, working with Indigenous communities, and all of the projects are building capacity in our communities. Capacity that translates into economic advantage, particularly related to the social economy. Now, the last example I want to just quickly talk about before I wrap up is this idea of the economic, cultural, and environmental resilience as one related to localization and action. So the example here is the Rural Agri-Innovation Network, known as RAIN, that I'm working with doing preliminary community-based research related to farmers in the Algoma district and the realities that have happened, their experiences through COVID and their post-COVID needs. It's really showing us, although we're in the preliminary data analysis stages, that localization can really be a form of resilience, and that most of the producers in the area, because of the types of supports they're receiving from these small scale organizations like RAIN, that are providing specific funding related to the research they've done previously, so really tied to those specific needs of local farmers, has really supported them. And there's been a lot of actual economic growth and business expansion through COVID rather than contraction, even as they dealt with labor shortages tied to the lockdowns. So when I bring it back to the SDGs, particularly here in Northern Ontario, and it's nice to hear from mayors in other areas because it sounds a little different from the realities here, but really, I think in Northern Ontario, our challenge is to work more with municipalities and planning boards so that they're supporting the research, the results of the research, the projects of activist educators and change makers, so that those bylaws and future planning not only support, but encourage SDG goals. And so that rather than finding reasons to say no to energy descent solutions or urban agricultural food security solutions or resurgent rural agricultural solutions, municipalities and planning boards are finding ways to say yes, because by saying yes to these activist movements and the research they're producing in their communities based on community needs, then the municipalities and the planning boards will also then be supporting the SDG goals related to resilience in community, particularly at the local level and regional level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wiper. We're now continuing to Acknowledgement Jevo. She's a steering committee member at New World Program Global Water Challenge in Ethiopia. Dr. holds a doctorate in PhD in development planning from the University of London. She's currently involved in the private sector and is a board member and senior advisor of different international NGOs. Dr. Oksumait Jebre Egseber was the director of the Regional Office for Africa in the United Nations Human Settlements Program, before retiring from 22 years of dedicated service in June 2015. She transformed the Regional Office for Africa both substantially and financially, and developed partnerships with the African Union and the United Nations Economic Commissions of Africa. She has written numerous articles and contributed to several publications within the UN. We're very, very honored to have you here, so please.
And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers. Let me start by emphasizing that we are in a new era, as the majority of the world's population is living in urban areas, and this proportion continues to grow. The urban geography of the world will drastically change with new regional urban systems, such as mega regions, urban corridors, and city regions. In the developing world, urban growth has outpaced the ability of governments to build essential infrastructures, and 1 in 3 urban dwellers lives in slums, and majority are women. Data has already been shown yesterday and the whole week, so I will not go to the details. Cities and towns in developing countries are already facing serious challenges, including unemployment, especially among the youth, high percentage of people living in slums, dominance of informal sector, inadequate urban basic services, including water, sanitation, energy, unplanned peri-urban expansion, social and political conflicts, high levels of vulnerability to natural disasters, and poor mobility systems, among others. The absence of an active public policy passively encourages spontaneous rural to urban or urban to urban migration. This migration always leads to hyper-concentration in the private cities of many developing countries, especially in Africa. National governments can modify this spontaneous trend only with adequate national urban policies and appropriate incentives and strategies, which are not happening. For urbanization to be sustainable and equitable, it must be part of a balanced territorial development. Well-planned and managed urbanization can actually enhance rural prosperity, reduce inequality, and improve cities and towns' environmental interface with their hinterland. As important as big cities are for economies of agglomeration, rural urbanization or transformation is indispensable for well-integrated economic development and productivity of the agricultural sector. Rural urbanization or transformation can ensure access of the rural population to equality of urban services such as education, health, water, sanitation, and other services at a level similar to big urban centers. At the same time, the urban population needs uninterrupted access to agricultural products, many of which only rural areas can provide. In that sense, intermediate rural settlements and market towns need to function as hubs that connect rural goods to global markets. Such healthy urban-rural linkage and establishing and servicing the population in rural centers and market towns will also require active intervention, adequate financial resources from governments. The transformation can ensure quality of life across the rural-urban continuum, from big cities to towns and to small settlements. Hence, avenues for change should include development of integrated national urban development policy and urban systems, strengthen democratic governance, especially at the local level, mainstreaming a green growth strategy, strengthen resilience of towns and small cities, strengthen research and development, urban planning and better urban design with pragmatic and enforceable rules and regulations. The result, hopefully, will be an innovation town, smart town that is responsible to the needs and aspirations of its residents, that offers accessible, affordable, and quality education and healthcare systems, sustainable, innovative, and safe transport for all. It creates conditions to provide adequate housing and basic services, and strives to improve housing conditions of the urban poor. Or at the same time, a smart town, a smart environmental town that enacts green principles of city planning, supporting the development of green building policies that use eco-friendly materials and building techniques. A town with economic opportunities and shared prosperity for all, uses its geographic location and comparative advantages to promote employment and stimulate sustained economic growth for the urban poor and the underprivileged populations. A town with sound knowledge and information management systems taps the huge potential of information technology to keep its citizens connected, develop trade and commerce, improve governance and city management, and deliver better municipal services. A town of enhanced political and cultural inclusion brings the government to the reach of the ordinary people through enhanced mutual engagement. It tries out the new modes of political participation, creating permanent platforms for dialogue and negotiation. It uses culture as a tool of development, as a means of integrated ethnic minorities, preserve regional values, safeguard linguistic and religious diversity, and resolve conflicts, and in the process, promote economic development. As we also learned this week, the means to bridge the urban divide is not lacking. However, developing a culture of innovation should introduce new policy frameworks and build capacity and increase knowledge on digitalized local governance and future strategies to foster new ideas. We must, however, muster the political will and good urban governance to make our towns and small cities fit for our children. And the time to act is now. Local governments, therefore, have an indispensable role to play in achieving sustainable urbanization. They must gain legitimacy to perform their function. Local governments are at the level closest to the people and have the greatest accountability to those who put them in place. National governments also have a critical role to play. Many fundamental
Sorry, Aksumite, you got muted for a second there. Could you unmute yourself? Thank you so much.
Sorry. National governments also have a critical role to play. Many fundamental issues affecting urbanization are decided by national governments, including decentralization, responsibilities of subnational levels of government, coordination between subnational levels, public financing, determination of debt, public debt capacity, land legislation, urban legislation, differentiated incentives, all this. It is obvious that for proper urbanization to occur, a country needs a national urban policy to establish priorities and coordinate between different governmental bodies. Such policies should also encourage adequate financing, good urban regulations, and equitable development. Strengthen partnership with all relevant stakeholders, including national and local governments, academics, research, civil society, grassroots, and other urban actors is critical. Let us work together to create an environmentally sustainable and resilient, economically prosperous, socially inclusive, and integrated urban future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Augsamite. We'll go further with Dave Manley. He's the founder and CEO of DEKE in the United States. Dave Manley is a national economic and financial writer and a commentator and founder and CEO of DEKE Digital, a content-based digital media and marketing service company. He writes about the economic future for the Daily Beast and appears weekly with Neil Cuvato on Fox News and Fox Business News networks. He's a third-time entrepreneur, having successfully founded and led a broadband technology service company and a middle market, which is a middle market merchant bank, and now DEKE Digital. So Dave Manley, please take the stage.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to my roots as an economic analyst here and just talk a little bit about how I think economic development has changed in this era we're living in, and why I live in Collingwood, Illinois, and was asked to join this group by our mayor, Brian Saunderson, who I think might be on the call. And Collingwood is I started my company's technology unit here in Collingwood. I'm actually moved here from Colorado in the United States. And we found Collingwood and chose it for reasons that I think kind of echo what I'll talk about a little bit today. So with no further ado, I wrote in 2013, I wrote that piece on the right, which was I had been asked to talk about the economy and what was going on in the financial markets from the time of the financial crisis in 2008. And I was convinced 5 years later that I didn't really know what I was talking about. Well, that's not true. 3 years later, I was convinced that I was giving answers, but without really much understanding, and started to dig in on what I really thought was happening. And in the end, I became convinced that we're living through right now a tremendous economic revolution. Information is changing the very structures, the economic structures that we're used to. And I think it's, and this has been said by many people since, but it was kind of newish in 2013 that the only things I could find that were parallels in human history were the agricultural revolution, when people stopped living in caves and started to settle places, and the Industrial Revolution, when they became, when the idea of the economic structures and much of the societal building blocks that we have today kind of came to the fore. So and everything that's happened since, and COVID, I think, has been the great accelerator in this, has made me believe that this is exactly what we're kind of living through, and the implications are inevitable and very powerful. The good news is economic revolutions only happen when the underlying economic fabric that changes, when the change allows people to get the things they want, however you want to define things, not necessarily material goods, but when it allows people to live more the way they want to live, then that revolution will proceed. And certainly, you know, those living in settled Mesopotamia had a nicer life than the people who were, you know, living in caves and bonking each other on the head before that, hunter-gatherers. And arguably the comforts we have today have, you know, exceed those of which a Mesopotamian farmer might have enjoyed. The bad news is that economic revolutions, I read a great quote once, which said, in a revolution, the old order collapses long before the new order emerges. And that, I think, is the problem of displacement and upset and and strife in some ways that we're all living through right now. And I believe we may only be living through the beginning of it. So I just want to go back to one thing about economics. Information in economics is a really, really important thing. A whole lot of the theories and the explanations and the received wisdom of how economic systems work is based on the lack of information. So companies are thought to, an economist named Ronald Coase said, companies exist to minimize transaction costs between unlike functions in a firm, which meant that there wasn't enough information for you to be able to kind of have anything but an increasingly vertically integrated firm in 1880. But the fact is now, the ability to share information seamlessly and immediately across the world means that specialization, further and further specialization in organizations is possible. And so organizations, the nature of companies is changing radically. Same time, jobs. A job is in effect a box of information. It's a holder for a whole bunch of agreements about, I will show up here, I will do this thing for you, I will do it this way, I agree that I'll be there during these hours, and I agree that I won't do the following things. And during those times, I will be here and I won't be anywhere else. That too is done because people don't have enough information to be free agents every day and sort of like, who will pay me the most today? Or which work would be most satisfying for me today? So they take something as a substitute. Both of those structures, I'm not telling you they're going away. I'm telling you that the need for them has been lessened and the nature of them is changing radically. And this COVID thing, which has knocked us all into, gee, we don't really need to be in the same room together, has accelerated both parts of this very rapidly. And I think you will see continued innovation and continued upset and continued difficulty on the part of governments trying to keep up with those changes and build regulatory frameworks for those changes and not strangle the good changes and not be overwhelmed by the bad changes. That's going to be the story of our world, I believe, for the next decade. So companies, I think, are going to end up being flatter, much less vertically integrated, much more specialized. Yeah, you see things happening like when the supply chains all sort of crumble, Home Depot goes and charters a ship. I guarantee you the guys at Home Depot don't want to be chartering ships out of the Pacific. They want to use shipping companies, and they want to use freight forwarders, and they want to use specialists. They're just doing things to try to ensure that at the moment. There's also a thing that happens when you don't need to have a giant economic infrastructure to start a new company, the pace of innovation starts to increase. That's what I refer to as ankle biters. When it costs very little to fail, many more people will try something. And if it only takes one smooth stone to bring down the giant, and suddenly instead of a couple of smooth stones a year, there's 100 or 1,000 kind of innovations coming at it, then in my opinion, the ability for people to kind of be giant and control the economy is going to be lessened, even though we see these monoliths at the moment, like major technology companies and the like, that appear to be exceptions to that rule. I think that will ultimately be going against sort of the tide of history. On the job side, I think you'll have fewer structured jobs and more unstructured work, which in a certain way creates both more and less economic insecurity. On the one hand, it's a very, controlling your own fate is a very powerful thing. On the other hand, not having a job to show up to every day for some people is a very difficult dynamic. For regional economies, I had to spend during my lifetime of work, I had to spend a lot of time working in Manhattan, and I became aware that Manhattan had, it was kind of like, why is Manhattan here? And Manhattan grew, and New York grew to prominence, really started to take off early in its history in the 17th century. And the reason that, why is New York where it is and why is New York what it is? And the answer is it was one of the most superb harbors on the East Coast of North America. And in the 17th century, to be able to build a city or to be able to have that kind of economic wheelhouseness, that's what you had to have. You had to have, it had to be a shipping port, or else you were, commercially, you were kind of nowhere. There were no railroads, there were obviously no airplanes. So it was, do I have a great port? And New York did. And it's an interesting question to say, what is the equivalent of New York Harbor for towns for the 21st century? In that old model, economic development levers were, money. You want me to show up, give me tax breaks, or make it easier. I want it to cost less for me here. That's my only consideration. People are automatons, and I will plug them in as necessary. And if I need a little more technology, it's good if there's a college here, and if there's not, I won't be able to locate my technology company here. Very much about what's there and fixed geographic assets and what's in it for me. I got to tell you, the new world that we're living in is about, if I as an employer am looking for people, I have to have a place. If I need them to be here, and I may not need them to be here, but if I need them to be here, and I would argue that there is still, much like a city itself, there is a huge benefit from having people together in collaboration. And if I want to have that group here, I need to be able to give them a life they want. And so to me, places that have the answer to that question of what is the New York Harbor of the 21st century is an attractive place to live. And that can be defined, that's defined by in very different ways for different people. I find pretty regularly that knowledge workers and tend to want to be places that have great recreational amenities, outdoor amenities, that they're in a place of some physical beauty. Climate sometimes makes a difference. They want a place that's safe, and they want a place with great educational opportunities for their kids. And and that's where the list certainly anchors and begins. All the other things that we've known of for great large cities kind of come in afterward, in my opinion. And I'm sure my opinion is biased, but that makes places that have all of those things a low friction ability to kind of function and live the life that workers want to live, makes them very attractive. So they need, the infrastructure is different, as you all know, it's connectivity and educational resources. But in my opinion, that we're going to see very different economic development patterns in the future.
We have to go in for landing quite soon now.
We're done.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Absolutely. We had Mayor Berry talk about the collaboration structures he formed his government for. We had Dr. Wiper with that I found especially interesting, the cultural trauma that COVID has exposed. With Oxamite, the sentence rural roots have to go into global markets, that really stick with me. And with Mr. Manley, the stuff that makes people want to live there, that's what the 21st century is all about. And now we've had quite different angles on our topic today. So I'll try to put it into the framework which I started with. It was the MIT model for different stakeholders for innovation. Further, we'll go into the more geographical, the regional to the global scale. But first now, innovation. We have the 5 actors: the entrepreneurs, the risk capital, the corporations, the governments, and academia. So at first now, I want from you is what of the following or the following 5 do you feel most familiar with of the stakeholders, and which of the 2 others do you feel most difficult to work with? And I'll repeat the 5 now. I hope this is an okay exercise to try to bring this a bit together, but Which stakeholder do you feel familiar with? And which of the two others do you feel it's difficult to work with? And the 5 stakeholders was entrepreneurs, risk capital, corporation, governments, and academia. So is there any one of you who wants to start off, please?
I can start, Gabriel.
Wonderful, thank you.
So you're asking which are the ones that are difficult to work with, and you want me to pick 2? Okay.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's funny because the traditional thinking would say that government does a terrible job of working with entrepreneurs because we are risk averse. And so I would say when it comes to risk capital and entrepreneurs, that's been the narrative in this country anyway for years. I think that has started to change, and perhaps I'm optimistic, but I think there's been a belief that bureaucracies are totally risk intolerant, and profit motives are fundamentally at odds with the delivery of public goods, and so the two will never meet. And I think that has slowly started to change. And I'll give you one small example, and that's, I highlighted the Electra example, the R&D through the Great Center on Green Energy. That's one area, one vertical where we are seeing a lot more collaboration in this country. But I think I'll give you another example. The city of Guelph did a wonderful thing. Guelph is coming up a lot today. Did a wonderful thing where they actually invited a couple of startups who had water technology, water metering technology, and water testing technology to come in and be embedded within the water department of their city. And they actually helped them bring their product to market, which had both local economic development benefit, local service delivery benefit. And I think for the startup, it gave them an environment to operate in and access to equipment and skill sets within the city's administration that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And that's actually quite a bold move because water is not an area where risk aversion is a bad thing. Sometimes when you're running a drinking water system, you should be risk averse. But the fact is that shouldn't prevent you from innovating. And I mean, there are lots of sort of safe ways to do these things. We've done some similar things with transportation technology and actually with a weather service out of Barrie that does very fine-grained prediction of severe weather called Instant Weather Ontario. So, I mean, these kinds of collaborations are now possible. So I would say where that's been a problem historically, it's perhaps getting better, although there's still a long way to go. And I'd be interested, to hear an entrepreneur's view of that too.
Wonderful, and thank you so much for bringing in the examples. That's exactly what we want. And for this session, we'll also draft a resolution afterwards. We have a draft already, but we'll now get more input, and that's we'll get inputs on principles, on recommendations, and on good practice. So I think you nailed them all 3. So thank you. Are there any other ones who wants to share their opinions?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Oxamite.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I have a different opinion. I don't think they are all difficult. That is a traditional way of saying they are difficult. The problem comes whether there is a clear understanding of what we are talking about or not. So it takes time to convince anyone, especially when there is no profit or when there is no payment for whatsoever reason. But if people understand and share the information about what they are talking about, I think there is a tendency to collaborate. I have seen this. I was the director of New York office in New York and Habitat, and that was my first introduction to big sort of businessmen, women. And at the beginning, it was sort of untouchable. But when, it takes time, when we explain the issues that we are talking about, sustainable urban development, which eventually also helps them to have sustainable business in the future, especially in terms of energy. Then it worked out. We even had some funding from them. So whether it's the entrepreneurs or others, or the governments are not untouchable at all. What we need to explain is how do we enable them or empower them to be able to listen to their communities, to understand their problems. Why do we talk about local authorities? Because they are closer to the people. And therefore we expect the local authorities, if they are closer, then they listen to their day-to-day problems of the people. If we are able to convince them to listen to the people, to share their ideas, that the people also have solutions to the problems that they are dealing with, then they can be. So it's a matter of opening our eyes, spending more time. As they say, if you want to go fast, run alone. If you want to go far, walk together. So that is my idea of how to go back to the positive side of it. Thank you.
That's a wonderful quote, Oxamite. And I'd like to go over to Laura. How, from the academia side, how do you see the two other comments?
Well, I think it's very interesting because we all, of course, have our own lens. So our comfort sometimes is very much related to that lens. And I started my presentation talking about positionality. So as somebody who lives in Northern Ontario, in a settler state, Canada is still very much a settler state in terms of settler colonial processes, particularly in Northern Ontario related to resource extraction. So when we look at things like sustainability, many northern municipalities are still very much in that mindset of resource extraction. It's mining, it's steel. And so for me personally, as somebody who's working in community and environmental resilience through an academic lens and doing a lot of community-based research related to this on local needs, it's very hard for me at times to work with government or corporations who are still very much in that neoliberal model that is about wealth generation for some at the expense of everyone else. So there's a real tension there for me. I want to work with government. I want to be able to work with corporations. And as Oxamite said, we need to be able to hear and listen to each other. But if you're still in a place where we're looking at, bringing a chromium plant to the zoo, which is, pretty far end of the spectrum from sustainable development, these are the tensions that I certainly struggle with.
So thank you so much, Laura, and over to Dave. Do you see these difficulties and do you have some clear examples on how we can solve them? We all want to listen to each other, but in our everyday lives, we have a lot to do on our desks, and the reality could be harder. So Dave.
Look, I think that I'm an entrepreneur and a capitalist. And by the way, I think that the idea that capitalism is a zero-sum game, that it's about one group wanting to win at the expense of others is ridiculous. I'm sorry. That is so far away from the mind of an entrepreneur, who is about creating jobs and about creating, and do you create, you create potentially wealth for shareholders, you create new technologies, you create better ways of doing things. And it's not, so I'm not sure. I think that my observation would be that the private sector has a discipline that profit and loss and the availability of capital creates a discipline. And the challenge is that discipline doesn't exist in governmental circles. We need steady rules and consistency so that we can plan around it. And I think the great difficulty of the COVID era has been that the rules have been changed rapidly, often kind of disconnected from science, often arbitrarily, and that makes it very difficult to respond. I was down in Toronto yesterday in a little Chinese restaurant, literally the best Chinese restaurant I've ever been in for the first time. I'm talking with the proprietor, and it was just, there was no one else there. She said we were the only people that had been in all day. And yet you could kind of see on the streets of Toronto kind of a great commerce and unmasked, people and living. It's just very hard to deal with a playing field that doesn't kind of hold. And I think if I had one, and I see it now in the United States where the government veers wildly back and forth, it seems to me that government's purpose is to work toward a compromise, a set of things we can all live with. And to the extent that ethos doesn't govern us, we've got trouble.
Then is there anyone who wants to make a comment on any of the thing of what we've heard by now?
Sure, I can chime in a little bit. I just put in the chat that, from my perspective, from the government perspective, I think difficult, and not because any one of these groups are difficult, but I think just risk capital and academia, just because of the difficulty of accessing, especially at a small town, being able to access those groups, those sectors. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity with those two sectors, risk capital and academia, and perhaps even entrepreneurship, where for a municipality, we are risk adverse, and we're more likely to adopt something new if it can be proven at that sort of that academic level, in the lab. And I'm thinking of a technology we were able to develop with an entrepreneur. There's a bit of risk and a bit of capital put into it on his end, but it was a very successful project in the end, where he modified his own technology to help a problem we were having, and taking our problem out to entrepreneurs in general and corporations. We weren't getting any results. We were just getting options that just didn't work, and it needed that approach of research and risk to get an approach that actually worked in the end. So.
Thank you so much. And now we've talked a bit about innovation, and you now took it very well over to the more geographical part of the discussion I want to go into. And we're talking about regional innovation, and we could have innovation between towns, like town-to-town innovation and collaboration. We could have innovation town to the nearest metropolitan city, so a kind of town-to-city innovation. And we could have a town to global innovation, which is maybe now more easily with the digital tools we have. And I wonder, out in the region and in the towns that wants to be innovative, how should they work now? Are there anything we could help them with to make sure this goes more smoothly? I'm not sure if that was an okay context to put it in, but I want to hear if the panelists have any thoughts about this. Laura, please.
Thanks. Just from an academic lens, I know here at the university we have a sort of arm's length research institute called Nordic Institute, and it does a lot of work across the region, so towns to towns, where we will do specific community-based research in terms of specific targeted needs in a particular sector. So for example, a project I was involved in a few years ago was the Northeastern Ontario Partnership for Adult Education, where we looked at issues of access across northern communities related to adult education. And we brought those communities together in regional dialogues to try to see if there are ways to connect across regions that sometimes are so vast that we don't have the infrastructure, the resources to provide service, for example. So how we could share resources across larger regions. And some of that work ended up changing some of the policies and the way people work together. And I think this is one way, this idea of community-based research is one way that universities can help municipalities work together, because we can help do the research related to that mapping, that needs assessment, and the solutions related to it.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Oxamite, please.
Thank you. I think what we have to look at then in the rural areas, what we expect is that the production of net marketable surplus. That goes to the market nearby, to the market towns, which leads itself, if there is technological development, then there is a market elsewhere, or to the next urban center, or to the metropolitan region. What we need to look at is how do we create this healthy urban-rural linkages so that the hinterland is well developed with the services that are required, be it in terms of education, because that's what brings transformation, health services, water, sanitation for them, so that they are also well educated and build the capacity of their local authorities within them, so that this improvement actually with enough innovation and technology, then there is, instead of getting raw materials, we may get products that are already transformed so that the farmers benefit, the small towns that create manufacturing activities get their own market within, and then what they cannot produce goes to the next stage, which is bigger towns, where you have huge investments and technological development. So we go from small settlements that are within the hinterland to small urban centers, then to bigger, and then to the city, and then goes to the region, from the region to the global level. But this needs a clear thinking how one should that there should be some sort of complementarity. We can create competitive urban towns, urban centers for the development accordingly. Thank you. But while I'm there, there is a question referred to me on the chat. So later on, maybe I'll come back.
I think you could answer that in just 1 minute if you have it in front of you. But at first, I'd like to, in this year's resolution, there is drafted that it's going to be established a town leader global network to work towards achievement of the SDGs. So the fact that the Urban Economy Forum and the Collingwood and the Habitat, UN Habitat is working on that, it could be very interesting. And your thoughts about both the democratization and the academia also in rural places all around the world to have focus there so they can have their markets locally. and globally. Very, very interesting. And you could answer the question now, please, if you have it ready.
Thank you.
But make it quite short.
Let me try. The question is, why do people move? Well, people move for a better life. I think most of us have traveled from one city to the other, not only from the rural areas, and that is in search of better life, except that there are also displacements and refugees because of war and difficult situations at the homeland. But also, what is the solution in urban? I have already said it, decentralization, but decentralization, not only the policy, but also backed by finances. So this linkage that I explained would actually back this question, this answer. And usually, people migrate, and the studies show that those who migrate actually are in a better caliber compared to the ones that are of the same caliber in the same place. So they are hardworking, and there is a possibility of integration. I think 1 minute is done, but I can discuss it with the person who has asked the further later, if need be. Thank you.
Wonderful. And I would like to hear from Mayor Lehman, the talk about the collaboration work you are doing in your town. I wonder, do you have put on like, have you done any research on these collaborations, and how do you work to develop them even better? And would you have a recommendation on other towns that want to copy your model?
Thanks for that. And yes, another one that I didn't mention is we have a partnership with the University of Toronto called Healthy Barrie, which is mapping health conditions in the city and looking at the geography of some of our major health indicators, and then starting to draw correlations to the determinants of health. And what that allows us to do is target our interventions geographically. And I would say, you know, the collaboration with academia has been particularly helpful for the research depth. I mean, governments I'm a mayor, we're a fast-growing municipality, as I mentioned. Most of what we do is keep the lights on and build new lights, because there's ever increasing demand where we're growing. And so the opportunity, you know, we just don't have the capacity, the bandwidth for in-depth research, and that's where a partnership with academia is particularly helpful, whether it's Georgia College or the University of Toronto or beyond. And I guess that's something to the theme of this forum, that I was thinking about this when we were discussing about remote services, because, you know, there's often just not a business case to provide a service for the private sector. I think about in a remote area, you know, I think about the fact that in Saskatchewan, the bus, you know, the government had to run the telecom company had to run the local bus service between cities, because there just wasn't enough people. There was no money to be made in doing it, and so it was done as a sort of regional economic development play that said, you know, this area, if we provide some of that infrastructure for growth, maybe that will help the area develop economically. And I think Laura probably can give examples of similar things like Ontario Northland in Northern Ontario. I think today, you know, I think those things are important, but much more important now with technology is the opportunity to shift to remote models. And something that Dave said at the beginning made me think of this, because, you know, because of the rapid adoption of online models of everything over the last 18 months. I think that gives more remote regions an opportunity to partner with organizations, first of all, that they would never have been able to before, because the platform exists to do it online. And also because I think the economic drivers are shifting. I mean, now it's less about having passenger bus service and much more about having access to the skilled labor that you can use to build a team when you're trying to bring a product to market, whether that's a a food product or a technology or those sorts of things. So I do think things are changing rapidly, and the key for regions that are short on some of those services historically, and that's been a real disadvantage. I think that's flattening. I mean, I really believe the Maritimes, for example, in Canada, are going to have an incredible next decade as people move there and as technology allows them to participate in the economy in ways that they weren't able to previously. And none of that means resource extraction or fishing or agriculture or any other of the sort of rural industries are less important. In fact, in some ways, they're more important because, we can't move food around in the way that we used to. We can't rely on, we can't even rely on production in other parts of the world satisfying our local needs. So we're going to need to build local supply chains, or at least alternatives. But the ability to participate in the global economy for remote regions grows every year with the expansion of technology.
There we go. Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Now I wonder if there is anyone else who wants to have the word and ask a question or say, comment anything on what the panelist has said. I can't see anyone. No.
I was just wondering, Gabriel.
Yes.
I had raised my hand. Thank you. I just wanted to again sort of say how thankful I am for this panel for having covered a number of issues for empowerment of local communities and cities and municipalities. So I was wondering about what both Aksumite and Laura Rosella Viper mentioned. The question of research, very often, how do we engage the communities in what needs to be researched on? Is it that the academia sits, in the ivory towers and decide what actually is a problem for the people? Or how does actually a bottom-up approach to research, especially in the question of urban economy and finance at the local level? Because we say that local authorities, cities, small cities and towns are nearer to the people. But very often, people are not engaged in the process. So what kind of processes are necessary when it comes to research? In old days, we talked about action research. And also we talked about research, sort of a participatory research process and appraisal that we mentioned about. So it's now because of all technology and everything, everybody assumes that, it automatically gets involved. We just have a tokenism on participation, but real participation, how does it happen? This is something that we would like to know. Are there methods or successful sort of examples that we can adopt, especially when it comes to cities and towns that are very near to people, as we say, but still far from making decisions by the people? Thanks.
I would love to answer.
Wonderful.
So what I've been talking about today also is this idea of community-based research, but it's often framed very differently. So you bring up a really good point, Anath and Krishnan, because if it is still directed by those in the universities, then it's really not community-based research. So in the example I talked about with the Rural Agri Innovation Network, this is a local organization that actually comes out of the Innovation Center in our municipality, but it works directly with farmers and has an advisory board that is built by members of the farming, the agricultural community. So the research questions that we used in the study that I just talked about briefly came from that advisory board. So it's farmers, sort of more of a ground up way of doing it, where they're saying, this is the need, this is what we need to know moving forward. Can you help us do this research? So as the university professor, it's kind of like allyship from behind. We help support by helping to do the research because we have those skills, but it's based on and is directed and defined by those communities that come to us and say, hey, we need to know about this so we can direct policy moving forward. So very much from behind, supporting community in making sure that they can get the answers that they need to make their own decisions to develop programs moving forward. And that, for me personally, is what community-based research really is, not when it's driven by the university.
Thank you.
Maybe to add.
Yes, please.
Yeah, just in addition to what was said, in many of the communities, especially in the developing world, there are structures of the communities. Like in Ethiopia, for example, we have what we call qabeles. There are urban dwellers associations. And therefore, these local authorities do have committees of their own as well, whether it's on sanitation or education. So the research we have to do has to be linked to those organic sort of a structure of the community, of the communities, but also to the committees of the local authorities. Because at the end of the day, they have to report, the local authorities have to report to the communities or to be encouraged so that they get the election process at the end of the day as well. So the way to link it up is with this existing structure, whether it's rural communities or urban structure. We have to go down to the structure of the communities and deal. They have students, their own children. How do we get them involved in this process? They feel at ease to talk to the students coming from the communities instead of someone coming from the tower. So if we are able to spend time, to take time with them, but also go when it's appropriate for them. Most of the time, when you do applied research, the problem comes, okay, can you get there by 8 o'clock? No, they have also to feed their children or do their work. So we have to make sure that we have plenty of time that suits their schedule, but also communicate with the communities, given what we want, to identify what they really want within their own given areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura and Aksumite. Thanks indeed.
Thank you so much. We are now getting close to the end of this session. I would like to bring in one topic that is how the innovation districts that are appearing in many cities around the world now could be linked more to the innovative towns, and how the innovative towns could have kind of a relation to the nearest city, quite more formal maybe than before. So we could make use both of the academia that is very often situated in the cities, but the industry also out in the towns. And but of course we have all the actors everywhere still. We have talked about research. We have talked about some barriers for innovation from the MIT stakeholder model for innovation. We've had a speech about how the capitalism is a good thing, that we work in the same way to make this world a better place, but that it might still goes quite slowly. What I will do now is to take all the notes and bring them together to something a bit, that makes some sense, and put it into the resolution. But I would love to have your sentences as well, either in the chat or sent to me, and I'll copy my email once again in the chat so you have it. And for the end, I would just like to say that this was a real pleasure, and I would like to thank Jeff Lehman, to Acknowledgement, Jebre Egiseber, Kari Nessa Nordtun, Laura Wiper, Dave Madley, and the Secretariat of this summit. So thank you so much, and I now think we're about to leave the room into the main session. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Gabriel, thank you, everybody. Thanks.